I assumed, but I thought I'd ask anyway. We know what happens.
Yeah, we all know what happens.
Come on, come on, come on. Okay. We are live on YouTube. All right. So once again, we're here for Clyde Lindsey's class, setting up a sequence and starting a sequence. Everybody knows Clyde Lindsey from Pixel Pro Displays. We've gone over our housekeeping rules and our raffle prizes at the end, or we will be giving away raffle prizes at the end, so stick around for that. I don't think I have anything more for you that I haven't already said, so please, Clyde Lindsey, take it away.
So thank you, Chris. It is really good to be here today to kind of kick off the virtual summit, which is an amazing thing. Even though we can't be together, I said this before we began. Um, it's awesome to be able to produce stuff as far as the community goes, to be able to bring people together, even though we can't get together, such as a Christmas Expo, a mini, or a meetup, or anything like that. So today's webinar, I guess it's going to be a webinar. It's going to be for the virtual summit, is set up and start a new sequence. What you need to know about X-Lights before beginning. And once again, my name is Clyde Lindsey. I am from Pixel Pro Displays. I have been lighting up my house now for, well, I believe the past 16 years, and I've animated my home since 2007, I believe, is when my first year was. So I'm starting to lose track. I guess I'm getting older. I won't say I'm getting old, but the goal today is to get people's to wrap their head around some of the basic understandings of X-Lights before you begin. Now, after this class is Michael and Diana's class. I'll repeat this later on. And in their class, they're going to go through the basic sequencing aspects. And my job today, because I've spoke with Michael, my job today is to start you on what exactly is baked into a sequence before you begin. Because there's a lot of things that X-Lights does in the background many people don't know about. So I've gone through and I've made a lot of detailed, a lot of detailed slides here with a very big, it's a very broad topic. And I'm going to hit the important parts of each of these topics that are related. And so it's kind of like looking down a football field. And this is an analogy that I was given when I was in college by my psychology professor. He said, Psych 101 is a giant football field. He said, it's wide and it's long. And he says, but we're going to cover a lot of information, but we're only going to go so deep into the information. And that's what I want everybody to realize today is, while this isn't going to be a highly defined video on everything, it's going to be a defined video specifically on the pieces and components that are important, so that you know where to go to find more information on it. And I've taken a lot of care into making sure that the information is complete as possible. So let's go ahead and get started with the objectives for today's class. Number one, what we're going to work on is the X-Lights directory and file structure. The second thing we're going to talk about is installing Audacity Queen Mary Vamp plugins. Then we're going to move on to starting a new sequence using the sequence wizard. And then after you have your sequence open, there are things that are important before you begin the sequence, which are the display elements and how to place those properly inside your display so that they make sense sequence-wise. And then finally, I'm going to touch a little bit on what I call outlining your song using timing marks. There are a number of detailed videos I've done in the past. So if you watch these, and if some of this information is repetitive, and it quite possibly could be, there are detailed videos for more information. So while I'm being very broad in what I'm instructing on today, I'm also going to take time to show you details in these other videos that I mentioned. So if you have a pen and a piece of paper handy, you can write these down. Now, obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, and once the video is finalized and uploaded, and it's you can click pause and play. You don't have to write it down. You can just pause it and go look up these other videos that I'm going to reference. But I want you to just be prepared. There is a lot of information, and like I said, a lot of it can be confusing. And I want to give time, as I said earlier, to let you ask your questions while we're in those sections, and then obviously plenty of time at the end. So the goal is to get through this in about the next 40 to 45 minutes, and I'm pretty sure we're going to make it. So we'll go ahead and get started. The Xlights resources and references that you're going to see are ones that I've already produced. You can find them on pixelprodisplays.com. I have done hundreds and hundreds of videos on Xlights and a number of videos on just the hobby in general and how to make connections in Xlights and networking and so forth. So any of our PPD videos, all of my original Leechburg Lights videos are still available, and I still reference those. And some of the things that we're going to do today, you'll find that there's a reference to some of those on the first video. Another resource that I recommend is Pixel Pro University Facebook group, PPU. If you go to Facebook and you search for PPU, by all means, you can find us there. I've always focused on the beginner and the intro and getting the basics down to people, because it always comes down to you and your investment in time into doing your layout. The videos.xlights.org, which the website wasn't working last night, but they fixed it. There's a ton of videos that have been created by other community members, as well as Keith Wesley. He has a YouTube page. Gil, who is a developer, has a web page. I'm pretty sure Scott has a web page. I'm sorry, YouTube page, not web page. I'm miscommunicating there. And then finally, we already know that there's an Xlights group, the Holiday Lighting Think Tank, and a number of other community pages that you're by all means more than welcome to. There, it becomes so challenging to visit all these Facebook groups now. That's why I primarily stick with PPU, because it just gets really busy. So there's a lot of resources for you to use there, and we'll just keep moving on here. To begin with, Xlights in your file structure. Now, most people don't consider file structure as being like a top priority, and where in fact it's rather important to begin with file structure on your computer in mind. And if many of you have been doing this for a while, you're going to find that over time you've changed your file structure, or things have changed for you because you've learned and grown with Xlights. If you're new to Xlights, this is really important to kind of start out on the right step. And what I would recommend is number one, create an individual Xlights folder. Now that sounds rather immaterial, like it's like a kind of a given. You want to create that single Xlights folder. And then within that folder, you want to create additional folders that are inside it to organize the data that you're going to collect or begin using. I've been using Xlights now for 7 years, 8 years now, I guess, for running the show. And creating effects. I did use Lightorama my first 2 years before Xlights was in its current form. And ever since 2015, which you'll see on the next slide, the amount of data that you collect over those years is rather large. And so keeping it organized, this is really, really a point that I don't think enough people make or even bring up. So one of the things that you will want to do is you'll want to create image folders. You'll want to create an import folder. You'll want to create a music folder, and what I call archives. Archives to me are your previous year sequences and your previous year layouts. That way, if you ever want to open up and see what you did 2, 3, 4 years ago, you can always go back and do that because you like something and you want to get back to that because you want to go back to that kind of a thing. You can see what you did and then go back in and recreate your layout for that instance if you want. Next, I have here save your sequences in the main folder. So in other words, whenever you save sequences, keep your sequences in the main Xlights directory. Don't put them in a sequence folder. Keep them in the main directory. It's just easier. And then save referenced items in folders that you've nested inside. So in other words, you've created an image, an import, a music folder. Keep those nested inside your main Xlights directory. So the top folder that you point Xlights to will be your quote unquote Xlights folder. And this is a physical example. The one on the left here is just a basic Xlights directory that I've created. So it says Xlights, and then nested inside are some of the rather important folders that you're going to use, which are images, the import, music, and like I said, 2019 archive. Now, you also have other files and file structures that are inside Xlights. These happen to be the two most important ones, which we're going to reference throughout the presentation today at one point or another. We have an Xlights network file and an Xlights RGB_effects file. These two files are your bread and butter. These are the two main files Xlights uses. Your RGB effects file is your entire show, period, your entire layout, and your network file here is your entire network file. And these two together combined are what will create for you your layout in Xlights. So anytime you work with these, and when we get more into the next slides, you'll see why it's important that that you keep structure in mind, because if you're gonna use multiple computers to sequence with, knowing which files are important is important in order to make those transfers if you need to make them. On the right here, this is my actual show directory. Back in 2014, I created a Nutcracker folder because it was called Xlights Nutcracker back then, and I called it Nutcracker because that's what Nutcracker was that's what Xlights was Nutcracker, was both. And you can see here where I have archive 2015, archive 2016. I literally could go into these folders, point Xlights to this directory, and open up my folder and view my old layout as if it was something that that I could go back and just open up my old sequences and look at. And believe me, they're pretty terrible after about 5 or 6 years of using the program. So that's my attempt at humor. So don't knock me too much. The other thing here is you'll see I have like 2018 demo layout. I needed some ideas, so I wanted to redraw my layout. I literally took my RGB effects file, created a new folder, and I threw it in there. And I started playing with my layout to create something new. That way I didn't mess with my original layout, which is down below here. I didn't mess with it. I only played with it so that I could see what else I could do with what I already had. I have a 2020 layout, and what I've done this year is instead of using the main file or the main sequence RGB effects file for my show, I put my 2020 layout into here, which is actually my 2019 layout. And as I begin building and adding and creating for my 2020 show, I'm making my changes here, but I'm not changing anything in my main folder, which is still by all rights my 2019 folder. But you see how I keep everything nested inside my Nutcracker folder. I have, this is version 3 Xlights sequences. So these are from 2014 and 2013. I can always go back and look at those. These are audio edited files. So in other words, I did some voiceovers for myself for the intro for my show, and I keep those files there as well. So I never have to look for them. This is a backup folder. These are color curves, about effect presets. There's shader files in here. All of these things are nested with inside of my in my Xlights file structure. And it's rather important that if you build this structure, this is probably the one topic that I don't think I've ever hit on very well, and that's why I bring it up now, because if you look at this is year number 1, this is year number 7, so you can begin to see where having structure is really helpful as opposed to having seven different Xlights layouts. So let's get into multiple computer sequencing. Basically, whenever you're working between two different computers, you have a laptop and you want to work on your desktop, you want to take your laptop with you to work, it's best to, it's the very best way is to use cloud-based storage services such as Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive. I'm sure many of you already use these in one manner or another. You can set up your, the important thing to using these, though, is that you set up your save directory on the same file location on both computers. That's really important. So if it's on C drive :Windows :user : or / I'm sorry, I'm saying colon, and it goes to desktop, make sure it goes to C /Windows user /Windows /desktop. Make sure both computers and the laptop have it in the same location, and you shouldn't have any trouble. Now, if you're not computer savvy, have somebody help you with this. But the transfer of data will always happen, but you being able to open up and render on your desktop and open up and render on your laptop on multiple devices, that it really is powerful. Robert and I, who's my business partner with PPD, Him and I both share the same file structure, and he can open up any sequence at any time that I'm working on, and he can see where I'm sitting at whenever I'm doing my sequencing, what I've accomplished, and he doesn't have to reconnect the pictures or the images or the shaders or anything because we share the exact same identical file location. So also easily sequenced from multiple computers. That goes without saying. It really does make it easier. Everything automatically uploads and saves on the cloud, and then it updates to your device, to all devices that you have logged into these services. Sometimes these services are free, but if you need further expanded storage, usually it's rather inexpensive. And at this point, I do recommend any of them. I love Dropbox. I've been using it for 10 years now. File transfers the old-fashioned way via flash drives and USBs. This can when you can't use cloud-based storage, or it's not a good or it's not feasible, where you don't want to pay a monthly fee and you have too much data or something. You need to know that the two files that we said earlier, the RGB effects and the Xlight's network files, are the most important files that you need to put on your thumb drive. Any sequence.xsq, which is the new sequence file. It used to be called the XML. If you have an XML or an XSQ sequence file, that needs to go with it as well. And finally, the other files that you're going to need are any related images, videos, shaders, and MP3 to take that and put that on your thumb drive so that you can transfer that to your mobile device that you are going to take with you that's not connected via a cloud method. If new files are created on the secondary device that you transfer these to, you'll need to return those back to the main computer whenever you've completed. So if you if you download a new shader, that new shader needs to go back into it, into your original computer, and not just stay on the thumb drive. It has to go back in. If you create new images, or if you draw something new, or you change the MP3, that has to go back onto the other computer. So this is rather the standard way, but it's also the more challenging way, because if you forget one thing, then some errors might occur. So, for example, the errors at the bottom here, he said errors on props will be displayed as a solid red. So whenever you play a sequence and render it, if you see solid red on everything, that means that the whole house effect that you have has a video that is missing or a picture that is missing. So unless you sequence that you want to see all red, then by all means that could be the case. But if you have all red showing up, that's the main reason, is because there is a picture or broken link to a file. So backing up Xlights is also an important understanding that you need to have before you begin. And it's highly recommended to do backups pretty frequently, especially if you're using Xlights a lot. If you only open up Xlights once a year, you really don't need to back it up. You have your backups that haven't been touched. But having a secondary backup, or a place that you put it, it's always important to have offsite storage of your backup. I have backups of all of our sequences on a thumb drive, and I update those quarterly typically. And then we also have backups up on our website so that we never lose that data. Clicking backup creates a copy of your XML, your XBKP files, your XMAP files, and your XFQ files. So when you click the backup function on your Xlight's file menu, what you're going to find is that everything that is rather important for you to recreate something will be created in a backup, so that you don't have to go look for it. What it's not going to create backups for is your pictures, your images, your shaders, and your video files. So that's also important to keep those in a safe place as well. In other words, you could probably back them up rather easy by clicking package sequence, which is under the tools menu here. After each and every session, season of Xlights, what you want to do is you want to create that year-end archive, as I said before, and you want to continue using the same directory. So if we went back to that previous folder where you saw on the left, just stay in that same directory. I've used the same Nutcracker directory for 7 years, and I never lose anything because I've taken the time to organize it. So that is really, really important. If you have multiple holidays, or you're considering doing multiple holidays, it's always best to, once again, nest all of your specific individual Xlights files into, separate them into 3 different files. For example, I have Xlights Halloween, Xlights Christmas, Xlights Independence Day. You know, for us here in the States, maybe you're in Canada, you want to do Canada Day, or maybe you want to do, I don't know, like a specific holiday that you're going to celebrate in your country. Create and it doesn't mean you recreate the layout. You're just taking your RGB effects file and your network file, and then you're editing your layout to only support those specific props. For example, your Halloween's going to have spiders and spider webs and skeletons and stuff like that in it, whereas your Christmas show is going to have snowflakes and candy canes. And so the difference between them is going to be vast, and you want to make sure that if you make changes or add more controllers, or you need more controllers for one versus less for another, it makes it easier for you to make those changes because you're in different layouts and different folders altogether. But keep in mind that moving nesting them into one main X-Lights folder is the best idea. It keeps everything organized. Moving your X-Lights folders from one year to another. So if you pick this up and this is year number 2 for your Halloween, and you throw it into your Christmas folder, if you have any images or things in there, it might break the links to images, videos, and shaders. They may display as red. So because if you move one specific location for your images, then that might break a sequence and it might not show up the right way. That pretty much is the summation of the file structure, and then we're going to jump into a short section here with the Audacity Queen Mary Vamp plugins for timings. What is the Queen Mary Vamp plugins? And basically, these analyze the MP3 audio and generate useful timing marks. So I know we just jumped from file structure. Now we're into timings. Why is this important? Well, because once we know how to set up our X-Lights directory from a new person's point of view, then the next thing we need to do, we need to make sure that we have all of the functionalities available in X-Lights to help us generate our sequences. Before we start sequencing, adding the Queen Mary Vamp plugin is an important thing. So what we have here is we have a program that basically will analyze the MP3 audio and generate useful timing marks for you. What this does is any timing, any MP3 that you have that has a click track style song, and when I say that, a click track would be like a specific metronome beat, like a tick, 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 where it knows exactly it's computer generated. And we see that in songs like a lot of modern songs have them, and you don't know that they're using them possibly, but like TSO, Wizards in Winter, uses a click track because it never misses a beat. But if you have orchestraic music that is done by an orchestra and it's flowing and it speeds up and it slows down, organically, then sometimes the Queen Mary Vamp plugins aren't as accurate. But whenever you have a click track style song, the Audacity Vampire plugins are really accurate. You can only use the Audacity Vampire plugins on musical sequences, period. You can't just open up a sequence animation, which we'll get into, and you can't just make it add beat tracks to it. But there are other functions, and more detail on the Queen Mary Vamp plugins are listed on the website. And this is one of those videos that I wanted to mention. If you go to pixelprodisplays.com and you search for Audacity Queen Mary Vamp plugin timings, I made a brand new video this year that shows you the easiest way to install it. Because I'm not going to walk through the process. I certainly don't have the time. But please take note of this. If you go to the website, Audacity Queen Mary Vamp plugin timings for 2020, that's the new video that shows you what Keith has done to update and upgrade how we install it. The easy way to install it, though, is to download it from the X-Lights website. Now, they finally got this working last night. I think it was about 2 or 3 in the morning, and that's whenever I finally got the screenshot. But as you can see here, you just go to xlights.org, you click on the download page button, and at the top of the download page button is your Windows 64-bit download for Queen Mary Vamp plugins. And then you also need to download the Visual C++ from Microsoft, and that allows this to work. I always install C++ first, and then I do Queen Mary Vamp plugin second, but I don't know that order really is necessary. That's just always the way I've done it. So at this point, I haven't looked at chat. So at this point, if you have any questions on X-Lights file structure or questions on the Queen Mary Vamp plugins, please, if you could bring those up now. That way we can kind of keep on track with time as far as things go. I'll open up the chat window because I don't have it open here. So let's see. I don't know if you guys can see this. You might be able to. I don't know.
Clyde, I'm looking now. Everybody go and keep yourselves muted. I'll just run through the chat real quick. There was one question that popped up a couple of times about. Now, of course, now I can't find it.
As far as I see a question, how does the user folder affect this? I don't understand the context of the question, Michael. How does the user folder affect this? I'm not sure what you mean.
I saw a good question. It's from Aaron. It said, "Is there an advantage to keeping your sequences in the main folder rather than a subfolder named sequences?"
It just keeps it neat. I think the way that it's a personal preference. Okay, when you package a sequence and the sequence is inside your folder, then you package that sequence, and then one of the files that gets sent is a sequence folder. And I prefer not to have a sequence folder. I like to see the sequence, the XML, and the RGB effects, or the RGB effects and the network file along with the sequence. Those are the three that are in the main folder. And then your subfolder would have, well, we have lost because our structure is a little different for the website. But for my home layout, nesting it inside, you can do that. I just prefer to keep it right there. There's really no major benefit for it. Yeah, so that's one of the challenges is sometimes file structures are different from laptop to desktop. I see Michael asked about, he says, my laptop username is admin, desktop username is Mike. So yeah, they have to be in the same locations, but I believe that Xlights throws out the base directory as long as it says C:/ and then it throws out like the base entry and it or the base directory. Again, I'm not an expert at this, so well, I'm not an expert at all file structure. I'm not an expert at all file structure, and this quite honestly is a challenge to answer some of the questions.
All right, so let's go ahead and get moving. Go and continue with your presentation. Okay. We'll finish these questions at the end.
Yep. Well, it's kind of a little more smooth sailing here because now we're going to get into the new sequence wizard. The good news is I have a video on this, and there's a lot of information packed into the video, and it's tied into a lot of the sequence settings that you see up above here. But whenever you do create a new sequence, there's a lot of little information that you might not be familiar with, and I want to try to unpack the important stuff out of it. So first of all, if you create a new sequence, you go to File, New Sequence, or you click on the icon that looks like this at the top of your screen. And then we open up the sequence dialog box, which is shown here on the right. You select either musical or animation. Remember that the Queen Mary Vamp plugins only work with musical sequences. They do not work with the animations. Next, you have some tabs up here. And again, the video that I'm going to reference, we'll talk more about that. We're not going to get into that. So next, what we have is when you click on musical sequence, it opens up your Xlights folder that Xlights is looking at already. And you can begin to select your MP3. Once you select your MP3, just click the open button. And then you're faced with this 20 frames versus 40 frames per second. So one of the biggest questions that people bring up is what's the difference between the two? And in the video, I do go over this. So you're going to get it here. But basically, whenever you select 40 frames per second versus 20 frames per second, 40 frames is more frames, but it's smaller timings. It's actually 25 milliseconds. That means every 25 milliseconds, there's a timing mark made. And that's compared to the 20 frames per second, that's 2 times more frequent. So in other words, where it's 25 milliseconds, you can have two timing marks in 50 milliseconds versus 20 frames per second, which is 1 timing mark every 50 milliseconds. So you get a lot more dead-on accuracy whenever you use the 40 frames per second. You get less accuracy, slightly less. I call it slightly less, but it's pretty close. And you have to keep in mind that 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 Xlights is a great program, but sometimes because of network lag, that dead on accuracy may not be as dead on as you hoped it is. And the personal preference there, this is a personal preference. So I typically program at 20 frames per second, and it just, to me, it just makes a little bit more sense. But other people have to have that much more fine tuning, so they go with 25 milliseconds. The custom button actually allows you to select any frame interval from 25 milliseconds and up. So if you do click on the custom button, this is this is the dialog box that will pop open, and you can set your frames per second or your milliseconds here to set it up the way that you prefer. Remember, render times on sequencing will increase with higher frames per second, or actually it's because now it's rendering twice as much because you have more time here to render. This has less time to render. And when you get into some really complex sequencing, and I like to do very detailed sequencing, then it takes longer to render this 40 frames per second than it does the 20 frames per second. It's recommended to do 40 frames per second when you're doing lyric tracks. It is more precise for that. I will give it that. Sometimes it's challenging though to do it with the 20 frames. And just keep in mind, 25 milliseconds is literally of a second. It's 0.025 of a second. 50 milliseconds is 0.05 of a second. So we're talking about really small numbers. Just as an example, the human eye can discriminate between a 20 and 30 frame per second, but anything over 30 frames really is hard for the human eye to capture. So keep that in mind. Faster may not necessarily be better, but many people really like that fine control. So we have a quick start screen after we get past the selection of frames per second. And this quick start will take you to the sequence screen. So whenever you click on the quick start, it will literally take you to your main sequence screen. Again, the tabs across the top are covered more in this video that I mentioned earlier. Create new sequence basics. If you want to write that down, you can go to the PPD website, pixelprodisplays.com, and you can type in the search bar here. It says create a new sequence. That's all you have to do, and you'll find this video. It'll pop right up, and this will go more in depth into the subject so that we don't have to spend a lot more time. But as soon as you do hit that quick start button, then the sequence screen then opens up. So then you're into your sequence screen. So if there's any questions about generating a sequence, I'll go ahead and scroll down just a little bit more and look at questions, see if there's anything that I can touch on real quick. I kind of see somebody commented on some of the other having different holiday layouts. If we run out of time, I'll remind you again. If we run out of time in the presentation, I am going to be in the vendor room right after this for the time allotted, so I might be able to answer one-on-one questions if you have specific questions. If not, by all means, send me emails via Clyde at pixelprodisplays.com. That's my email. But any questions on specifically creating a sequence? So yes, the answer, John, just question, the different sequences can have different timing settings. Yes, that's correct. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and press on. Next, we have probably one of the most confusing topics to discuss. And again, I have a video on this that's rather good. It's on display elements inside the sequence tab. The icon you see here is the icon for display elements, and it's at the top center of your Xlight screen. Unfortunately, I failed to capture a screenshot to show you where it is. But whenever you click on this icon, you're going to get a dialog box that's called the display elements dialog. And this dialog box is used to organize all props and groups for your display, the elements that are physically in your display in your sequence tab. And it's rather important that we begin to organize these. So whenever you first open up your sequence and you have a master view here, that's the first thing you're going to see is you have a master view that Xlights will generate. This is auto-generated, and there is no rhyme or reason, but when Xlights generates it, it generates it in its auto-generative way. There is no fixing the master view. You can never change the master view whenever you open Xlights. It's always going to generate in a default way. The problem is that sometimes this isn't very useful whenever you're sequencing, because the order that these props sit in depends on how the effects that you place on them are rendered. The master view, again, the master, it must be adjusted with every new sequence, so it's tied directly to the sequence itself, and you do not want to go in here and change this every single time that you create a sequence. You want to be able to, and I'm going to show you through display elements how you create a solid master view so that you just click on it every single time you open the sequence, so it becomes easy. First, a couple things though. You can create a new one by clicking add and giving it a name. In this respect, I have something that I called all groups. To create it, you just click the add button, you give it a name, and then you can begin. It will have, basically it will be blank. There won't be anything over here. And what you can do is you can begin grabbing an item from here and clicking and dragging it over. You can place them in any order that you desire. But what I recommend is any groups that you create, place them at the very top. So you can see that all the groups here are listed at the top. Then the next thing that I recommend is any whole house group or any large groups, you want to keep those to the very top, because rendering order is determined for sequence effects, is determined by the order that everything is set up on here. Place your individual models at the bottom. That's always a good thing to do, unless your group is specific to a set of things that you want to avoid having over-programmed, and you want to make sure that that group has the programming prioritized. Having anything down at the bottom, and the video that I reference will go over this in more detail. If you have props missing, now I know this looks like a train wreck of a slide, but if you have props missing from a view, it's really easy to move them and add them. The Xlights developers have cleaned this screen up a lot. You're able to select a model or a group by just clicking on it. You can click and drag. You can double click on a model or a model or a group, and it'll pop it over there for you. Or you can click and hold control down, and you can select multiple at one time. And you're able to do that, move multiple and click and drag, or use the arrow buttons here to move them over and back. So you have a back button and you have an over button. So you can customize this the best way that you need to. Views are great for when you only want to look for certain things on your screen. So this helps organize your screen whenever you're sequencing. If you have a lot of props, it's helpful to create a view just to see things such as, oh, I just want to work on the mega tree today, or I want to work on my pixel tree line, or I want to work on my verticals. So I only want to look at those. So I create a view that just literally shows me those items and those items only. That way I'm not distracted by other things, if that makes sense. Then we have, finally, after you've created a new master view, and I've done a bunch of videos on importing videos or importing sequences. It's rather important that every sequence needs to have a new master set up to ensure that every time you open it, you click on the view and you click make master. What this does is that saves you the time of having to reorder these things from the standard master view. It really is a time saver, because once you create this master view, when you create the new sequence, you open up your display elements, you select this, and you create master, or you make master, and it fixes that whole sequence so that it puts everything in order. The only way to save your master or any changes done in display elements is to click on the layout tab, which you can see here, and the red save button will light up. And whenever it does, then that means a change has been made. Click the save button. That's the only way to save display elements. On a final note, this is the video that you want to search for. It's very detailed and very specific, and it talks more about sequencing and the way effects are rendered, but it also covers this topic. This plays a huge role in how your effects are done. So you can learn more by going to put your display elements in order by typing display elements in the search bar on the PPD website. I see somebody posted that in chat. Thank you, Damien. Any question on display elements? And I believe we're crawling up on the very end of the presentation, so I think I've kept it in line here. So now I'm going to go back to Robert Bates' question where it says the advantages of checking the blending box. Well, the blending box is located not in display elements, but it's located in your sequence settings. The advantages to checking model blending depend on your preferences as a sequencer. If you like effects to blend together with other effects that are on the display elements list, the important thing is that a check model blending allows you to have the effects layered, even though they should be overwriting each other. So it all depends on exactly what your end result is. Somebody's asking you to go back 2 slides. Can you go back 2 slides with the master? Okay, maybe it's 3 slides. That would be this one here. So that is for Stuart. Or wait, I'm sorry. That's for Jay. No, everybody's commenting now. Steve Connor. So Steve Connor, here's your master. Here's your master slide. You mentioned shaders earlier. What exactly are shaders? Shaders is an effect. I have a video on the PPD website. By all means, Jay, go to pixelprodisplays.com and search for shaders. There are literally 2 videos, and if you're in Pixel Pro University, I did a live webinar on the shaders. Actually, I did an Existentials on it. I did an Existentials on shaders, and I did an Existential on the video effect. So you can search the videos.xlights.org website. It's probably on there because Jordan did do the video on it, rendered it for it, so it's up. Could you clarify, does Xlights render per the order of the master view? It does. So this is why it's important. And Stuart, if you go back and you're watching, and I'm going to change the screen here. If you go and watch this video specifically on display elements, putting elements in order, this will tell you exactly, it will show you in detail why using a master view does create effects in a specific order. So being on the view, so specifically whatever view you select, it doesn't take effect until you hit make master. So that's why it's important to come up with one master. So that should answer that question. I'll pop the PPD website up here at the very end. That way you guys can see it. Existentials was good. Yes. Render order absolutely does have, and this is for Andrea, it does have, a render order does have a huge impact. So if you do not set up your master view, and you're working on, let's say, your group view, and your group view is out of order compared to your master, or they don't jive together, then your final render is going to possibly look different depending on how you have these different things set up in Xlights. The way from the bottom to the top, from the bottom down here to the top, the render order is from the bottom to the top, so it will affect it. If you do a master on one sequence, can you go back and apply it to another? Absolutely, because now that's why when we go to the next slide here, that's why whenever you make a change and you into that master, that new master that I showed you, that's why whenever you click save, it saves that change for your display elements. So you can open up any other sequence and automatically just go back to this and change in that new sequence. You can click on the new view and you can click make master, re-render the sequence, and it will fix any kind of oddities that you have. So I think that's I'm going to press on here with the next section, which is our final steps before sequencing. And again, this is based on breaking down a song using timing marks. So one of the biggest questions is, how do I start sequencing? And it's really easy, but the problem is it's very daunting. Whenever you have a sequence opened up and you have a vast array of timings that you can utilize from, songs can be broken down into their core components. We all know what the introduction to a song is. It's the point of the start of the song. You have a chorus, like uh, cho- uh, where they sing the same thing multiple times through, where it's identical. That's called the chorus. You have a verse, verse 1, verse 2, verse 3. You can break them down into that. And I basically will take, whenever I create a new sequence, I'll take the new timing and I'll rename it, and I'll call it outline, or I'll call it basic or something. And then I'll just go through and I'll hit the lowercase letter T as a timing mark while the song plays. And then I can go back in and I can make fine adjustments as exactly where that starts and where that ends. And that tells me that's a segment of the music that I can sequence in rather easy. And it's rather important, because whenever you break it down, then it's not so daunting to sequence a whole song if you consider that that you're only working in specific area, and I'll get into that in the next slide. But please take note while you're here. At this point, I did use the beats from the Queen Mary Vamp plugin option. Again, you can reference the video that I talked about earlier on the Queen Mary Vamp plugin. And then you'll also see I have some manual timing tracks. They're called hits and hits 2. In this specific sequence that I did, these were manual timings that I went in, listened to over and over again. I nailed where I wanted those timing marks to be so that I could play specific effects at those times. So X-Lights is incredibly helpful and useful, uh, the ability to create is there. You just have to know that you're able to do these things, and it's really easy to create as many timing marks as you need. Uh, Finally, how does it help to break it down? And basically kind of touched on this. The smaller the segment is, the easier it is to program. So for example, this is the verse. If I just wanted to work on the verse and all I did was I put a box around that specific area, that timing point, we can kind of break down the sequence. This is the 10-second mark. This is the 27-second mark. So now we're working on 17 seconds of a song as opposed to 2, 3, or 4 minutes of a song. And it really makes it much easier for you to take in the whole thing, but you're not doing it all at one time. And there's another school of thought. Repetition does help you visualize things, and especially effects that will fit. And you'll realize that over time, you'll realize what you like to sequence. And so keeping yourself kind of constrained a little bit, build a box around there for yourself, and you can literally work on one segment at a time. Now, another question that some people ask me is, do you sequence everything at that moment, everything in the whole layout at that moment, or do you sequence one prop from start to finish? And the answer to that is, I do it both ways. Sometimes I sequence from start to finish. However, if I sequence from start to finish one prop, what I tend to do is I tend to over sequence in one area. Whereas if I sequence from top down, then I tend to sequence everything all at one time, and it becomes more filled in, and it looks a little bit more organic. Like I'm utilizing a lot of the different props in different ways. So there's benefits to doing this, but either way. Sometimes doing it this long form way really makes me look at a sequence and say, hey, my icicles are the #1 prop in the entire layout. I want to feature those. So those are the things I really want working all the time. Maybe the windows and doors, and maybe the house outline or the verticals. Those I work on as well. If I feel like working across the sequence and really building those up, I have that opportunity to do so. As I said earlier, Michael and Diana from Showstopper Sequences, they're going to be doing the next class in this room after this, and I believe they're going to get into the let's actually sequence. Let's do some basic sequencing. But this was kind of to set you up so that you know before you start sequencing, there's a lot of things that are very important. Robert and I are going to be in the vendor room after this class. You can join us there. If you have specific questions, you're more than welcome to ask there. But him and I will be in there, and we'll be talking about some of the things that PPD is doing, especially for this weekend for everybody who's joining us. If you have any other questions about what I've gone over, I think this is, I think we're crawling up on the last 10 minutes, and I think we made it just in time. So if you have any questions, go ahead, throw them in chat, or I'll let where's my buddy at? Steve at?
You're exactly right, Clyde. We got a couple minutes for some questions if anybody has them. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask, or ask in chat.
Good question in chat. I've already started sequencing. If I download Queen Mary Van plugin, do I have to start my sequence all over again? Absolutely not. It's very versatile. You do have to close X-Lights and reopen it. Well, you should close X-Lights and reopen it. Sometimes you might have to restart your computer. I'm really not sure. Usually whenever I load Windows, like I loaded Windows on this computer that I'm on today, and that was one of the things that was that you forget that you have to go do is download it and install it, because as soon as you go to get it, you realize, oh crap. But the 2020 video on installing actually was from this computer, because I was setting it up brand new, because I put a new SSD and a hard drive on. So,
Clyde, Robert
yes.
Here.
Hello, Robert.
I was asking, once you set in your own timing marks for the chorus and for the verse, can you actually name it so that when you're going across the sequence, you know, okay, this is where the chorus is and this is where the verse is?
You can, and you can see I abbreviate. This is I for intro, V for verse, B for bridge. To do this, this is part of lyric track training. To name this, what you would do is you would hold the shift key down on your keyboard, and you would double click on the actual line, and it will open up a box where you can type into, and hitting enter closes that box and puts it in as a tag on the label here on the timing mark.
Okay, so I'm holding the shift key and what else is that again, Clyde?
Shift key and double click.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Now there's an option in X-Lights where you can turn that off. You can just double click on it, and if you just double click on it, it may play. If you just double click on it, it may open this box. There's a double function that it serves, but the preferences on in X-Lights can change it either way. So if it just plays when you double click on the line, hold the shift key down and double click it again, and it should open up and let you type. Great question. Any tips for using Mac and sequencing than using Windows for the actual show? I will tell you that I have no experience using a Macintosh. This is for Douglas Krantz. I have no experience using a Mac. The advantage to using a Mac is faster render times in regards to specifically video heavy content that is on X-Lights. So if you have a sequence that has a lot of video in it, Macintoshes render much faster with video. They do a great job at rendering whenever it comes to video. But as for just standard effects will render just as fast on a Mac, mostly just as fast on a Mac as they do on a PC. So that's the basic difference. And I'm going to do a webinar here coming up in a week that will talk about some new additions that that Dan Culp has done to X-Lights that have helped render times.
All right, Clyde, that was a great presentation. I'm sure everybody here appreciates it. I know I do. Did you have a sponsor slide at the end there?
I sure do.
Awesome.
That's
so
right.
Everybody, this is a list of all our sponsors for this virtual Christmas seminar. Please visit each and every one of them. Each and every one of them contributes highly to this hobby. So please visit them and show them your appreciation. Everybody stick around. I'm going to end the YouTube stream, and we'll get to the raffles. I'm sure that's what everybody's here for, right?
Everybody loves the raffle.